Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at this Yugoslav M76 designated marksman's rifle. This is, in effect, a Kalashnikov scaled up to 8mm Mauser, and it's similar to some cousins, guns like the Romanian PSL. A lot of the countries in the Soviet Union's sphere of influence did not, in fact, have the opportunity to get the technical data package to build SVD Dragunov rifles. And so instead, they took what they did have, the Kalashnikov, and scaled it up. The intention with this rifle was not to make what we would maybe consider a sniper rifle today, something capable of really minute, fantastic accuracy, but with a relatively low rate of fire. The idea was to have something that could be integrated into a typical squad to give a balance, something that was more accurate than an AK or an SKS, equipped with a telescopic sight so that you could actually identify targets at longer ranges than is possible with iron sights, but something that would also function in sort of a multiplicity of roles because it does have backup iron sights on it. It's semi-automatic, it has a detachable box magazine, and it's capable of a much higher volume of fire than a bolt-action true sniper rifle. So that was the justification of the M76. Like I said, this is basically a scaled up AK. So let's take a closer look at it and see how it evolved from the Yugoslav AKs that went into production in the mid-1960s. The M76 was manufactured by the Zastava factory in Serbia, which also made a wide variety of other AKs. So they started with the M64, which interestingly was a rifle that they didn't actually get a technical data package for. They reverse engineered the M64 from captured or obtained milled receiver Type 3 AKs, and they made a number of changes to it to suit their own preferences. Most significantly, they actually added a proper last round hold open feature to the gun. Now today, when we see Yugoslav AKs, what we're used to seeing for a hold open is this flat surface on the back of the mag that the bolt hits and stops. So the gun does lock open, it tells you that it's empty, but when you pull the magazine out, the bolt slams closed. Well, on the early M64s, there was actually a true proper hold open device that would keep the bolt open even after you retained the magazine. However, they ended up actually, they got rid of that feature. It was perhaps a bit too complicated. It also meant you couldn't use standard AK magazines in those guns, and that was probably seen as a problem. Anyway, I'm digressing a bit. The M64 evolved into the M70, still with a milled receiver, and it was the M70 that was the basis for the M76. Now, to adapt this to 8mm Mauser, they stretched the receiver out. I will touch on this briefly at the end of this video, but this receiver is actually American-made. It's not an original Yugoslav one, so be aware of that. There are some slight contour changes that this doesn't perfectly match the original receiver. Anyway, beyond that, the design is all the same as the AK. So, where guns like the PSL added a thumbhole style of stock to copy the Dragunov, the Yugoslav designers retained a pistol grip and a separate shoulder stock. I think this is a quite comfortable gun to carry. I think it's more comfortable than the Dragunov or the PSL, personally. Let's go ahead and take the scope off and take this apart. So it should be noted that while this attaches in the same way as a Russian scope, we have a mount here with a locking lever that just tightens down this rail, and then of course we have a rail on the side of the gun. The rail here is dimensionally completely different from the standard Russian rail. So Russian optics will not fit on the rifle. This Yugoslav optic, this thing's in poor shape, this Yugoslav optic will not fit on a PSL or a Dragunov. This is the ON-M76B scope. This is the third iteration of this scope, and it's the one that was on all the rifles when they came into the US. This started off as just the M76, which differed in that it had an infrared detector built into it. That was something that was a little finicky. You had to charge it, but it would allow you to determine. It didn't let you see an infrared, but it allowed you to determine if there were infrared light sources being used in the area, which would indicate that someone was using night vision, most likely. That wasn't actually all that important, they decided, so the where the 76 had that functionality, the 76A, they got rid of those bits, but they were the housings for them were still built into the scope. And then eventually the M76B version of the scope, they got rid of, they made a new housing for the scope that no longer had the mounting points for the infrared detector elements. This is a 4-power scope. It is illuminated with tritium, and so they all have these pretty cool little radioactive symbols on them. However, tritium has a half-life of approximately 10 years, and the tritium elements in these scopes are all dead. Unfortunately, I don't know of anyone who has come up with a good way to bring them back to life, but that may happen at some point. What we have here is a pretty simple system. We've got windage adjustment on the left side. We've got an elevation adjustment on the top. This is a BDC cam, so it is graduated out to 1,200 meters there. And if we look on this side, you can see this is the cam for 7.9 millimeter M76 sniper ammunition. Zrak, Z-R-A-K, the company that made this scope, did make a variety of other cams for it. So you could get the BDC cammed for 7.62x39 or 7.62x54 rimmed or 7.62 NATO. They made a wide variety of rifles and scopes to fit them all. So the scope itself is the same across the board, just has a different cam. Looking at the reticle itself, what we have is pretty typical of military rifles of the period. You'll recognize this off of a PSL or a Dragunov scope as well. We have a center pointer with windage hash marks on either side. We then have a rangefinder in the lower left. That's based on the height of your presumed human target, 1.75 meters. So you put feet on the bottom line, and then the top line that the person reaches to tells you how far away they are if they are 1.75 meters tall. So 200, 400, 600, or 800 meters. Now, as for the rifle, we have a 10-round magazine for it. They did make the M77 for export, which is basically the same rifle in 7.62 NATO. They did also make a version of this in 7.62x54 rimmed, although that one didn't seem to get much adoption kind of anywhere. We will find serial numbers on several of these parts. This one is a little difficult to see, but there it is, 37611. Mine is not a matching numbered gun, unfortunately. Have a serial number on the side of the bolt as well, so you can see this one doesn't match. There is a serial number in the stock. This one's been sanded down a bit and also doesn't match. And there is also a serial number in the scope base, which should match, and again on mine does not. Okay, getting back to disassembly, this is just like an AK. We're going to pull out the recoil spring. Bolt carrier comes back, lifts out. This is really just a massively oversized AK. We can pull the bolt out as well. It's just a really big AK style bolt. We have a receiver that is identical to a standard AK receiver. It is milled. It does use the same style of attachment for the buttstock as the fixed stock 7.62x39 AKs, Yugoslav AKs, the M70s. So there's one long screw that plugs the stock in. It's got a little hollow socket in the back of the receiver. Fire control group is standard AK, semi-auto only, even on the original military guns. Lifting up the handguard lever here, we can take off the handguard. In here, we have a 3-position adjustable gas regulator. This is almost identical to what would be used on the M91 that would eventually replace this rifle, but you can see small, medium, and large gas aperture. Now, what's a little interesting here is I've seen 2 different versions of this. So on this particular rifle, the front of the gas tube just has a little tang on it that sits in that notch to lock the gas plug in position, and they'll fit in any of them, of course. What you'll see on the M91, and what I've also seen on some M76s, is a separate flat spring that's attached to the gas tube so that you can actually adjust this regulator without having to take the gas tube off. On this example of the rifle with this setup, if you want to change positions, you actually have to remove the top cover, remove the spring, remove the bolt carrier and gas piston so that you can then remove this so that you can adjust the gas system. not nearly as convenient. I suspect this has to be the early version of that system. That said, 2 is the standard firing position on these rifles. 3 is for if the gun gets fouled or you have low-powered ammunition, and 1 is for if it is particularly hot, you have overpowered ammunition, or if you have extra back pressure on the system because you are using a suppressor. Because these rifles were built with a long slotted flash hider here that includes interrupted threads on the back for attachment of a suppressor. And those were actually issued and used by the Yugoslav Army. So it does also have a bayonet lug on it. This was intended to be potentially a combat squad combat weapon, and they wanted the ability to mount a bayonet. The story of the M76 in the United States is a bit of a complicated one. So the first batch of M76s were imported before the assault weapons ban in the mid to late 1980s, and those guns were arranged to have been manufactured without the auto sear. Now, these guns, this design was never intended to be a machine gun. It was never actually a machine gun. However, it kept the auto sear because that part works as an effective out-of-battery safety in a semi-automatic version of the mechanism like this. However, the auto sear is considered a part representative of a machine gun. A receiver that has the capability to accept that auto sear is considered a machine gun by the ATF. So that first batch of guns that came in were manufactured specifically to not include that part. They came in, all was good. After the assault weapons ban, another company decided to try and import guns, and what they did was they sent a sample of the standard M76, complete with auto sear, to ATF for approval, recognizing that it wasn't a converted machine gun, like it was never a machine gun in the first place, and ATF actually went ahead and approved the rifle. 2,000 of them came in, they were all sold. ATF went back about 6 months later, changed its decision, declared that they were in fact machine guns because they had machine gun receivers, because they were machined to accept auto sears. The guns were all collected up, the receivers were destroyed, customers were refunded, fortunately. The company that did it took, ate a significant chunk of money on that. But the result was then there were a lot of parts kits available for these because the receivers got chopped up, but not the rest of the gun. There was no need to do that, no requirement to do that. So receivers were manufactured by a couple of different companies, and parts kits were assembled by a couple of different companies, and that leads to a bit of a variety of who made what using which setups here in the United States today. So this particular one was assembled by Century. They don't have the greatest reputation for doing such a thing, but this rifle seems to work pretty well. In fact, we're going to find out exactly how well it works because tomorrow we're going to take this guy out to the range and do some shooting with it. So join me again tomorrow to take a look at this out at the range. And in the meantime, thanks for watching.